Oh, let's see. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to wait just 1 second because I do see more attendees filing in, so we will just wait 1 more minute to get started. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in Representative Tenney's monthly agency webinar series. These webinars provide valuable resources to constituents, stakeholders, and so I appreciate everybody joining today. I'm very pleased to have the Northern Border Regional Commission, NBRC, with us today to discuss their upcoming programs. I have Chris Saunders, who is the federal co-chair of the NBRC. I have Rich Grogan as the executive director, and we may or may not have a representative of the New York State Department of State joining us as well. There was a couple scheduling conflicts on that one. Before I get started, I do have a few housekeeping items. This Zoom will be available online for the Congresswoman's official site, but for the most up-to-date information, please contact the NBRC as the programs do change and information does become outdated. There will be a Q&A function after the presentation, so please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom to ask any questions. Now I would like to introduce Chris Saunders to begin our presentation. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. It's really great to be with you all this morning. I assume some of you have at least a working understanding of the Northern Border Regional Commission. Rich Grogan, our executive director, is going to do a deeper dive, giving a primer of who we are and what we do and how we fund programs and how we do that in New York. But we're particularly excited to be with you all in New York today. Our territory has grown in the recent years, and so we have new communities within New York that we are able to invest in. Traditionally, our awards have been focused in some of the Northeast counties of the North Country. But thanks to leadership in Congress and the President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, we have a record level of funding to invest in New York and our 3 other states. The president has really charged many of our federal agencies with going out and focusing on rural America and thinking about how we can support projects and economic development in those communities. And the Northern Border Regional Commission as an entity that primarily focuses on smaller cities, small villages and towns and rural areas of the Northeast is really well suited to be a partner in that call to action. So we're excited to be with you all, excited for your questions and talking about how we can deploy our resources to help what your visions are for your communities. And to talk a little bit further about that, I'm going to hand things over to Rich Grogan, our executive director.
Well, thanks, Chris, and welcome everybody, and thanks to the Congresswoman and her office for hosting us today. Again, we are appreciative of the opportunity to talk about our funding. Obviously, it's one of our favorite things to talk about. So Chris and I's contact information is on this first slide. I'm also going to include contact information for the state of New York. We partner closely with the state of New York on all of our programs. And so Kyle Wilbur, who's the state program manager, his contact information will be up here later in the presentation. And we'll aim is to give you an overview today, but also leave you with how to get in touch with us if you have questions going forward, and how to kind of keep on our radar. So with that said, got some topics here that we're going to cover. As Chris said, we're very happy to take questions. Please queue those up to the end, or if there's a way to raise your hand and interrupt me, that's totally fine too. We want this to be a useful conversation for everyone involved. So starting just with an introduction, the NBRC was first authorized in 2008. We started making grants in 2010. The through line for all of our grant making is really economic development. And as you'll see, there's 7 areas where we're authorized to fund by statute, all of which relate in some way to broadly economic development. Our appropriations, even outside of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act legislation that Chris mentioned, have grown significantly from about 15 million a year in fiscal 18 to over 60 million in fiscal 22. That part of that growth has come in the form of some partnership programs. Chris referenced working with multiple federal agencies. I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about specific partnerships with USDA and EDA and how those have benefited the state of New York and our other states. But it's been an exciting growth period for us because additional funds mean we're able to put additional grant dollars out the door to the communities that we serve. As of fiscal 22, we just announced awards in August. And I'm going to start off with a bit of an apology because I updated most of the information in this presentation with those awards, but a couple of slides you'll notice are through fiscal 21. But the top line numbers are all accurate. As of fiscal 22, we've awarded almost 400 grants across the 4 states, which is a pretty compelling number, amounting to nearly $115 million in direct investments. And you'll see that matching figure there in terms of leveraged investments is over $415 million, which is a number we're particularly proud of because we see these funds as being really critical to catalyzing investments from the private sector, from other public funding sources, local funding sources, et cetera. So really happy to see growth there. It's important to note that we're a little bit different from some other federal agencies in that this is a true federal state partnership. As Chris mentioned at the top, the state of New York is a crucial partner in our work. The leadership of the NBRC includes our federal co-chairperson, but also the governors of the 4 states that we serve who appoint an alternate to be part of the governance of the organization. In New York, that is Mark Pattison, who is the Deputy Secretary of State for Local Government Services in the New York Department of State. And Kyle Wilbur, who works for Mark, is the state program manager with whom we deal with many day-to-day issues. Applicants are required in our application process to really demonstrate how their projects align with state and/or regional and/or local economic development plans. And so it's integral all the way from application through award and even grant administration that applicants are really keyed into priorities in the state of New York and that they're kind of all rowing in the same direction in terms of aligning with New York's priorities for developing its economy. And we take that very seriously. I want to talk a little bit about match requirements because that's a question that folks all tend to have for the NBRC. Of the 28 counties that we serve in New York, which as you see from the second bullet, was a significant increase from 14 counties that we served prior to our 2018 reauthorization. 26 of those counties are considered distressed. And this is probably not the format to go into the weeds of how we calculate that distress, but it's a formula that comes through our federal legislation. And what that means functionally for an applicant is that 20% of the total project cost has to come from non-NBRC funds. And in the case of a county that for which 20% of the cost is match, those can't be federal funds. The NBRC is only allowed to fund up to 80% of a total project cost with federal dollars. The next category, which is only 2 counties, and I've got a map coming up that will show you precisely which those are considered transitional counties, in which case 50% of the total project cost has to come from non-NBRC funds. Again, can get into some of those percentages a little bit later, either in an offline conversation or in questions. Here's a map you're all familiar with. As you can see, most of these counties are dark green. Those are the ones that are considered quote unquote distressed by our measures, meaning that 20% of the funding picture for the total project should come from non-NBRC funds. Saratoga and Schenectady counties are considered transitional, and so projects from those counties are required to provide 50% of the project cost as matching funds. The eligible funding categories, pretty crucial to thinking about how your project might align to the NBRC funding. You'll see that a lot of these are focused on infrastructure, transportation, of course, basic public, which is a term we get some questions about, but typically manifests as water and wastewater projects, particularly in New York. That seems to be a very popular theme among grantees, and certainly a need that the NBRC has been able to address across multiple projects over the years. Telecommunications, which often in our grant making takes the form of broadband, but I like to remind people can also include cell coverage, which as any of us who work in this region know can be spotty in places. And certainly we've had some uptake on facilitating some cell build out in the past. The other piece of this, the other number of this 7 that I would put in that infrastructure category broadly is renewable and alternative energy resources. Particularly, we've seen some uptake with regard to wood products and solar as well. The other elements are more community development, what we would consider community development. That's 4, 5, and 6. Lots of workforce projects are funded by the NBRC. I'm going to put up who's eligible in just a couple of slides to talk through that. The NBRC is not able to fund private companies' workforce development programs, but we've provided funding for community colleges and other eligible entities who've built out impressive workforce development programs. Basic public health care, and number 6 is resource conservation, tourism, and recreation. When we get to partnership programs, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the funding that NBRC has made available specifically for our outdoor recreation funding in New York and in the other states, which, as we all know, has, particularly during the pandemic, I think really in stark relief how much of a driver that is for the economies of all 4 NBRC states. As far as who's eligible, state and local government entities, really any instrumentality of government. So in New York, that includes, regional authorities, folks like that, as well as nonprofit organizations, primarily who focus on economic development. But again, as those of us who work in this region know, there are many nonprofit organizations for whom economic development is just a piece of what they do. And so we are often in the position of funding those organizations as well, and Indian tribes as well. A little bit more detail on investments in New York specifically since 2017 across all of our programs. You'll see that number from 2017 to 2022 has grown pretty significantly. We've all seen in this kind of pandemic, post-pandemic area timeframe, the amount of federal resources has increased significantly across multiple agencies, but we're happy to see this growth among grants that we're able to provide. And in 2022, it was over $7 million, including some of those partnership programs. This slide is one of the ones that I offered a bit of an apology at the beginning of my comments to say that not all the slides had been updated to 2022, and this is one of them, but gives you a good idea from 2017 to 2021 how much has been invested by county in New York. And certainly this is a map we want to update. Not necessarily guiding decision-making going forward, but certainly good for us and everyone to know that, each county has been able to avail themselves of some funding, but some more than others. We're going to talk about a couple of programs that we have now, and I know that's probably of interest to attendees today. Our flagship, and what I want to say at the outset is that as a staff, we're considering now, given the influx of Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, we're considering, how we want to structure the naming of these programs going forward. So the names I'm providing you today may not look consistent a year from now, but the thrust of the programs are going to be consistent. And I would urge anyone to reach out to us going forward if you have questions about specific programs. But the first is our flagship program called State Economic and Infrastructure Development, or SEID. It's our oldest program. It's the one that most everyone in the region who's familiar with NBRC is familiar with this vehicle for funding. Typical timeline is releasing guidance in the winter or early spring, application period to follow, and awards come out in August with the idea that projects that are shovel ready are able to get started on or around October 1st of a given year, start of a new federal fiscal year. This program alone was responsible for 5.8 million of that little bit over 7 that I put up a couple of slides ago in New York in 2022. And it covers all 7 eligible funding categories that I put up earlier as well. This is the program that's probably the most active with regard to working with our state program manager, Kyle, whom I've mentioned previously in this presentation. What we encourage applicants to do, which I think is important for this conversation, is to reach out to the state program manager early in the year. Don't necessarily need to wait for guidance from NBRC to come out to start conversations about, I've got this project that we're working on. Do you think it would be a good fit? Are there some areas that we should strengthen in order to make it more competitive, et cetera? The other thing I'll offer is that on the back end, if a project is not selected, we also encourage those grantee applicants to reach out to the state program manager's office to understand how to position that application to be more competitive in the following year. So again, pending funding renewal, we expect guidance to be coming out in the winter, early spring of next year. A program that we've taken a little bit of time to work on relaunching is the Regional Forest Economy Partnership, which has been a special $4 million carve out since fiscal 18 and is continued right on through fiscal 22. That appropriation is targeted specifically to support the development of the forest products industry in our region, which, as we all know, has gone through several changes and iterations over the last few decades. And so there's a particular interest on behalf of Congress and us as well in terms of how to support that industry in our region. I said a couple of minutes ago that we had taken a bit of a step back. We're planning to relaunch that program later this fall. And so would encourage people to stay up to date on that opportunity. Will be an open grant opportunity for potential grantees from all 4 NBRC states. Specific parameters will be coming out, as I said, here in just a couple of months. And then the sort of headline news of last year, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with broadly, is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. NBRC was very fortunate to be included in that legislation to the tune of $150 million that came to us, in which, I should say here, because I've listed that approximately 35 million will go into New York over 5 years. The NBRC has a history of dividing resources equally among the 4 states, and that's a tradition that we will be planning to continue through the deployment of IIJA funds. Eligibility and match requirements will be consistent with our other programs, and we anticipate a focus on infrastructure through the deployment of these funds. But, kind of late breaking news, I think that probably those other funding areas that are eligible will also be included in the broader call for proposals when that comes out. That's another program that we anticipate having some guidance coming out in winter of next year. So busy winter for the MBRC, but looking forward to getting that on the street. Quickly, I'm going to hit a couple of partnerships because there may be some additional entry points for applicants who are considering funding through the MBRC through these programs. The USDA partnership has been active since fiscal 19. A tranche of that funding supports outdoor recreation economy focused projects in New York and in the other 4 states. And we've also been able to leverage those funds to fund some non-outdoor recreation projects in New York and in the other states. Before I say more about that, I want to talk about EDA as well, because we have a partnership since fiscal 19 with EDA that results in about another $750,000 a year for New York. And those funds tend to go mostly to what we would consider hard infrastructure projects, whereas the USDA funds tend to go more towards community development focused projects. I mentioned those two together because the entry point for grantees is through the SEID application round. I think that's important to know. Our state-based partners complete the scoring of applications and work with our staff to identify which projects might be appropriate for USDA funds or for EDA funds. So if you're a grantee, pretty seamless for how you might be able to access these funds. Just make sure you get an application in through the SEID round. We have some smaller partnerships, although I'm reluctant to say small because they've grown quite a bit just in a couple of years. One is with the Health Resources and Services Administration, and one is a new partnership which has yet to be deployed, but we anticipate some guidance coming out on that in the next few months. That's with the Department of Labor, a program called WORK, which is the Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities program. And that will be specifically workforce development opportunities, which has a pretty excitingly broad spectrum of entities that can apply. And so excited to tell you more about that when there's an announcement that's a little bit closer to coming out. But that one was new in fiscal 22, so we're still working with the Department of Labor on that. Regarding the HRSA opportunities, those have been very helpful for working on workforce issues related to those who've suffered from substance use disorder, as programs providing a re-entry point into the workforce. And so those grants in fiscal 21 and in fiscal 22 have gone mostly to existing entities within New York that are offering those services. But going forward, we're working with HRSA to develop some more kind of direct opportunities for eligible grantees to be able to apply for those funds. I've already mentioned the importance of the state program managers in what is essentially project development, identifying potential projects that might be a good fit for MBRC, and taking cold calls from potentially interested grantees who might want to access MBRC funds. The MBRC staff, led by myself, administers projects. We pride ourselves on responsiveness, have grown our staff significantly over the last couple of years to be able to provide excellent, what we consider customer service, quite frankly. And we're here to help you. If you've received an award and you have questions, for run into roadblocks along the way, et cetera, we're here to help you work through those, and excited to do so. Also important, because the MBRC is committed to working with entities who may not have accessed federal funds before. We work through a network of local development districts in the state of New York to help administer projects. And we find that that's a really helpful thing for people to understand, again, because as we all know, some communities or entities may be intimidated by working through a federal project. It can be complicated. There's a lot of questions about allowable costs and things like that. So these LDDs are here to help you with that. And I'm going to put up a list next of relevant LDDs in New York so you can get a sense of who that is, but not mandatory that you know who the LDD is that would work with you prior to application. And certainly you can ask NBRC staff if you have a question. The typical timeline for a project is 3 years. There is a possibility for extensions. Obviously, we don't like to go into a project planning for an extension, but we understand that, for example, with construction projects, it sometimes is the case that winter comes early or decides to stay late and construction season is short, or during the pandemic, we have had several episodes where people have been unable to get on the list for a contractor or something like that, and we have provided some relief for those projects to be able to allow them to complete. Here's that list of LDDs that I promised, and again, Michael indicated early on that this presentation would be available and recorded through the Congresswoman's website, so you can refer back to it. But this just gives you an idea of the LDDs that work with specific grantees in these areas. If you were to apply and there isn't an LDD located specifically near you, you can reach out to NBRC staff and or to Kyle, and we'll be sure to help you find an entity that can work with you. So happy to take questions. Chris and I are happy to take questions. My contact information is here. Kyle Wilbur, who is the state program manager for New York, his contact information is here. I would encourage folks to stay in touch with our website, which is nbrc.gov. Hopefully pretty easy to remember. We put all program announcements on there. Michael and the Congresswoman's office are on our press release list. So anytime we have new funding announcements, et cetera, come out, those are distributed widely, as well as to local news outlets in New York. The other person I would point out on this slide is Andrea Smith, who's not with us today on the webinar, but is our program director. She has purview over all of NBRC programs. Her direct contact information is here, and she can certainly answer any questions you may have specific to programs. So again, want to thank the Congresswoman for allowing us to join today and have a platform to talk about NBRC programs. This is work that we're all extraordinarily passionate about and love, and love to see the outcomes of the work in New York. Happy to take any questions here, but also knowing that people have different levels of enthusiasm about asking questions publicly, I'm happy to receive an email or a phone call if someone has a question afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate that. And just echoing what he had said, if you do have any questions, there's the Q&A function down below on the bottom left of the screen. I'll just kind of give it a minute just in case anybody's typing out their question. But while that's happening, I did just want to say thank you so much, Rich. Thank you so much, Chris. I believe that it's Mark Pattison who's representing Kyle Wilbur today. So I just wanted to thank you as well for being on here. And yes, anybody that's in attendance or anybody that watches this later, please feel free to reach out to our office, the Congresswoman's Utica or Binghamton or DC office if there are any questions regarding this program or any info that you guys are looking for. We're happy to kind of fill in the blanks and put people in the connection with the right resources. So I just want to say thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Rich. You guys have been amazing to work with, and I'm very glad to continue working with you guys. And if there are any questions that anybody has, please feel free. I do see, let's see. I don't see any questions in there, but I again would encourage everybody to reach out to the NBRC or reach out to Kyle as well for the state program manager for New York. So I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.